Good evening, everyone. I'll start all over again. So nice of you to come out on a very hot evening, which I hope will not melt somebody from Scandinavia. You're okay with this?
I'm okay with this.
Are you going to do any mountain climbing? Because I understand you're a distinguished climber.
Yeah, well, not outdoor. I did some indoor climbing before I came here. A set on the rocks, it's called.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it's nice little gym. Actually, the most expensive climbing gym I've been to in the world, and I've been to quite a few. So I asked the driver, how can they afford it? And he said, well, here's where the money is. He said, so I guess it's lots of rich people around here, right?
Well, I can't speak to all that, so not being a climber.
Oh, you have a Mercedes?
I will take your word for it. Anyway, I want to welcome our virtual audience as well. And tonight's program is going to be hosted by Robert Anglen, ace investigative reporter from the Arizona Republic, and Patrick Milliken of our staff, who is lurking over here. So I'm going to let them tackle actually pronouncing your name, or why don't you tell us how? Because I've tried, and I can't get any better than you, Nesbo, which I know is all wrong.
That's pretty close. But you see, my father, he grew up in Brooklyn, New York, so he called me Joe, which means that whenever I'm outside Norway, I'm just Joe Nesbo.
You're just Joe?
Joe Nesbo. Yeah,
okay.
That's it.
What's the cool little slash through the O? How does that change things in your last name?
Well, it's yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway, now you know. So, Patrick, you can talk to Joe. Where are you going? Getting your stuff. All right, Robert, over to you, since Patrick is not quite together here.
Well, I want to welcome you back. I think
Thanks.
I saw you, 5 or 6 years ago with The Thirst?
I thought it was even more, but just five or 6 years ago. Yeah, okay.
I think so.
Were any of you here then? Yeah, okay. I see. Yeah.
And you've brought Harry Holback with you?
Yeah.
Hula?
Yeah.
Is that it?
Yeah, I see it.
And it's a charming tale of decapitation and cannibalism and rape. And it's really uplifting. So I want to thank you for it. I enjoyed the book quite a bit. It raises a lot of issues, and we'll tackle them. Patrick?
Yeah, it's funny. I have my little list of notes here, and among them I have parasitology research, Harry's Crew, which I really want to get into, and just tour de force, which is what this novel is. It really is a tour de force of just about so many different kinds of things in one novel. Very ambitious book. I don't know if you'd agree with that, but and then Lucille Owen, music we're going to talk about. I wanted to ask you if there was a book like Nesbo's Oslo, if there was a book like that, which would be awesome. So, and then also at some point, I would love to ask you about, has anybody read Macbeth? Yeah. Your take on Shakespeare. Yeah, so we'll get into all those things. But I guess
I'll add mechanics of deceit, because I'd like to talk to you about the way you layer your book as well, all your books. But again, this one follows your book, The Knife, right? And which was by your standards even dark, so darker than most. And we find Harry sitting in a bar, typical Harry, although he doesn't have needles in his arm this time. He's got a drink in front of him, and he meets this woman, this mysterious kind of woman who reminds him of his mother, and in true Harry fashion, he's going to save her, right?
Well, yeah, and I also think that, is this on? Choo. It is, okay. And I also think that actually she saves Harry, because at the end of the previous novel, Harry is, his life is in ruins. He has lost the love of his life, and the last scene in Knife is when he's sitting at the airport, and he has his intention is to drink himself to death. Just doesn't know where to do it yet, so he's rolling the dice and letting the dice decide where to go. And so we learn at the start of Killing Moon. That, like you said, he has ended up in a bar in California, in Los Angeles, Laurel Canyon, a bar called Creatures. And he has chosen this bar because it's close to his to where Frank Zappa used to live, and he has a reason to believe that Charles Bukowski used to go to this bar, and so that's so he's well on his way to succeeding with his plan of drinking himself to death when, like we said, something happens. A woman.
It's always a woman. And Laurel Canyon also is a pretty dark place, a little dark history. I mean, Bukowski notwithstanding, the Hollywood Hills murder, the Johnny Holmes and the porn killings, and then even Charles Manson, and all those things seem to. Harry's like a magnet for that stuff, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean he's born around the same time I was born. I was born in 1960. Although Harry is lucky in the sense that he gets older a little more slowly than I do. So he's actually only in his early 50s now. But we share the same. We have the same references in popular culture. So he's definitely very much into the music scene in Laurel Canyon back in the 70s. But also there's actually some good music still coming out of Laurel Canyon, like an artist, Jonathan Wilson, who is one of the best singer-songwriters last 10 years, I think.
And you talked about Harry sitting at this bar because he lost the love of his life. And I can't help thinking that there's nobody sacred in your books. There's nobody you won't kill off, and except maybe Harry, and I'm not even sure that most times I open your book. Yeah. And it's funny because we've come to relate to these people. We relate to the characters you've built, and then you disassemble them one by one in these books. Talk a little bit about that.
I think that that happened in the first novel. I sort of killed off the love interest for Harry in that first novel, but I think it was especially in the third novel where there's a female detective, Ellen Yelton, who is I establish her as a character in a very traditional way, so and I get the reader to invest in her emotionally, so at least you're pretty sure she's going to be around for the last act, but then she gets killed in the first act, and that is I do that very consciously, or I build her up consciously. The point is to have the reader realize that anything can happen here. There's like you said, there's no rules.
But there are rules, and you just break them.
There are rules. No, yeah, well, I think that right now the rules. The main rule is to break at least some of the rules. I think that's where we're at in modern storytelling. Or at least it was when the TV series started getting popular some 10 years ago. It was cutting edge, and it was like a modern way of storytelling. I think right now TV series have become so expensive, so we're back to the producers and the studios not taking chances any longer. So I think it was more cutting edge when Wire and Breaking Bad and Sopranos and Mad Men. But anyway, that was the first time I broke a rule like that, or I sort of messed with my readers' minds maybe in a way that I think when doing that, you need to be fair. But what I'm trying to tell my reader is that concentrate on what's happening here now, because you can't see around the next bend.
Well, and I was thinking, I jokingly said the book was uplifting, and but it kind of is, and Patrick threw to that. But the idea that here comes Harry, he's got this crew of people around him, he's kind of rebuilt his, well, he wants to die, but then he doesn't, and he encircles himself with this group of people, and I just think, oh, poor Harry, there's nothing you're not going to do to this guy.
Well, I think that in this case, it was. I can understand that you found it uplifting, because it is. I mean, it is. He's gathering his dream team when he comes back to Oslo. He's there to work as a private eye for a rich guy who is not from around here, but he's a real estate owner in Oslo, and he's suspected of the murders of 2 young girls, and so he has given Harry all his money to gather, the best investigators. So Harry says that, okay, I'll decide myself who I need for this job. So he gathers a dream team of 4 people, including himself. The first he contacts is Ståle Aune, the psychiatrist that has been in the series for several novels.
Such a great character.
Yeah, but he's ill now. He's got cancer. So he's at the Radium Hospital.
See, I told you.
Yeah.
And that's
It is
another thing.
uplifting.
This gang convenes at the Radium Hospital, which I think is really great.
Yeah, they need to use his room at the hospital for the headquarters for the dream team, and so the other guy he contacts is perhaps the most despicable character I've invented in the series, which is Truls Berntsen, who was I can't exactly remember which novel I introduced him, but I was pretty sure then that he was just going to be around for that one novel. But then he was such a amazingly despicable character that I wanted him back, because I didn't really find any moral ground in his character. It was there was nothing there, so I had to dig deep. I brought him back just to dig deeper to see if there was some solid ground there, and it wasn't until he appeared in his 3rd novel that I did actually found his moral ground and found his humanity. And anyways, he is the most corrupt police officer in the series, and right now he is suspended from the police. He's suspected of having stolen some drugs, and so Harry finds him.
Nobody's perfect, right?
No, he's perfectly despicable.
And he's a good guy. Remember, he's a good guy.
You think he's a good guy, Truls Berntsen?
In the book.
In the book he is, but because that's the way he has evolved throughout the series, that he has sort of bounced back, and that goes for Harry also. He's also a comeback kid, and so the last one in the dream team is one of Harry's childhood friends. Well, actually, Harry's only childhood friend, Øystein Eikeland, who's also been in several of the books. He's been a taxi driver. Now he has promoted himself to selling drugs at the Oslo Central Station. So Harry finds him there and persuades him to join the team. So that's the team.
Isn't there also kind of an honorary 5th member? The gentleman who's in the bed kind of next to.
Yeah, he becomes like a sidekick for the team. Yeah, he's there. He has some knowledge that will come in handy later on in the story.
Was it some of the scenes with this crew? They just seem like you're having a lot of fun writing. Is that true, or are those just as difficult as any other scene?
Yeah, I mean, putting together. You mean putting together that team?
And in the scenes where they interact, the dialogue,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
they're talking together, there's just
I
magic
love
on
that
the
because
page.
they are such different personality.
Right.
They are like, yeah, it's. I love that, and you know, it's. You have to be careful when writing a story like this, that if you fall too much in love with the characters, you may, you know, give them too much, you know, stage time. You may, so you have to keep your eye on the story, and you know, so what they're doing and saying should contribute to the story. And actually, I had to edit quite a lot because I've written too much about the interaction between those four guys.
Right. So the kind of ritualistic murder of these two women are what draws Harry back to Oslo. This is a tough book because, as I said, there's so many elements to it, and I hate to give away any spoilers, you know. And it would be easy to do that too in this case. Bringing up the topic of parasitology, which I did earlier, is that a spoiler?
No, it's not. It was actually how the book started. The idea for the book. I mean, it's 4 years since I wrote Knife, and it's. I knew I was coming back to Harry because I wrote like a storyline for Harry many years ago when I was writing the third novel in the series, The Redbreast. And it's not like I've planned every novel, but there are some key events, especially in The Knife. There were at least 2 key events that was planned already back then. But I also need an idea for a novel that I know is going to be a Harry Hole novel. And it took 4 years because I had some other ideas that didn't include Harry. So I had to write some standalones and a collection of short stories. But the idea for this novel came to me in the jungle in Thailand. I'd gone down there to climb with some friends, and we had been climbing in the jungle, and we had come across some really creepy bugs. And during dinner, we were discussing, you know, bugs in general, and you know what's
Over
the most
dinner, you were
creepy.
Discussing bugs.
Sorry,
You said over dinner you were discussing bugs.
we were, yeah.
As one does. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
And so, what is the most creepy bug ever? And the winner was a doctor who told me about this sea lice. And it creeps into the mouth of the fish through the gills of the fish, and there it attaches itself to or first it starts squeezing the tongue of the fish. It does that so it stops the bloodstream to the tongue. So eventually, after a week or two, the tongue will fall off, and then the lice will quickly attach itself to the tongue stub and start living off the bloodstream. And so it will slowly grow and eventually become the new tongue of the fish. And seemingly a well-functioning new tongue. They measure the life expectancy of fishes with the sea lice tongue and a normal tongue, and it's more or less the same. And I couldn't believe this. So when I got back to my bungalow, I Googled it, and I saw this picture of a fish with an open mouth, and sure enough, inside the mouth you could see the tongue. Only this tongue had eyes and big antennas. And so I started,
It's terrifying.
yeah, I was looking at it, and I was
By the way,
staring
it's,
at it,
it's
and
interesting to look at the audience reaction while you're
Yeah.
telling these stories.
and I realized that okay, so this is going to be a new Harry Hole novel, because it's interesting, this relationship between the parasite and the host. Trying to translate that into human relationships and the gray area of who's the parasite and who's the host. In different relationships. So that was then I started with that one image, and it became Killing Moon.
I love the part. There's a line in your book where they're talking about the parasitology, and they make the point that this research could win, Nobel Prize for the person who perfects it. And then your Oyst says, well, couldn't it also, become a huge weapon? And it's. But in your book, the character uses this to basically, it's mind control. And the upshot is it lets him have sex with whoever he wants, right?
Yeah, well, this is based on
Careful now.
on I'm going to be careful, but I think it's okay to tell this. No, but I can give away spoilers by mistake also. So, but it's one of the most common parasites is a parasite that you will have in cats and mice, and you will also have it in humans. In some countries in the world, between 15 and 30% of the population have this parasite. But when we have it, we won't notice. But this parasite then lives in a it needs to, when it's in the cat, it needs to get back to the cat to reproduce itself. So what it does is you'll find it in the cat's urine, and if it's then drinking by mice, it will try to make in order to come back to the cat to reproduce, it manipulates the brain of the mouse so that the mouse will become sexually attracted to the smell of cats. So you will see infected mice then willingly going up to the cat, and the cat will look at the mouse and thinking, what the dinner is served, it's so it will kill the mice and eat it, and so it will reproduce, which is quite extraordinary. And I have no idea why I haven't. You may have heard about this, at least I hadn't. So that was also one of the basic ideas for
So the
for this book.
implications for use in the human world, of course, are very interesting. Is this? I wrote this
It's
down, toxoplasmosis.
it's interesting. Can you sort of do something to the bug so that it works the same way when in humans?
I'm still just struck by you have this incredible research, this incredible thing, this parasite, this knowledge, and there's going to be a guy who thinks, well, this is a nice way to boink, basically.
Well, you create one of the most memorable villains in any of your novels. Absolutely. This character, Prim, is there anything you can say about Prim, how you came up with him?
Well, it's I think it's based on. This is not the character; it's based on someone I know. Some of my characters, even some of my villains, they have had, I've sort of borrowed some character traits from people I know. But this character is more. Well, actually, the come to think of it, it is actually one guy who was sort of, when I saw Prim. The way he looked, I was imagining this one guy that that I know. But apart from that, I'd say he's a result of my imagination. It's a combination of people from fiction, from movies, from music. Yeah,
You
but
make
mostly
him,
from my nightmares, I guess.
is he sympathetic at all to you?
I think when you write about villains in stories in general, at least for me, there's sort of two ways to go. You can go with a monster that isn't really a character, and often since Harry is investigating serial killers, he's often looking for a monster, and then you don't need that to be like a real life person, because the serial killer is more like the shark in Jaws. You don't need to see the shark, and it's not about the shark. It's about the people who are scared of the shark, or hunting the shark, or becoming victims of the shark. So the shark or the monster, the serial killer, is just a mirror that you hold up for the rest of the cast. So you can see their, courage, their shortcomings, their intelligence, their stupidity, and so on. But then there's the other way to go, and that is the antagonist you use to force your readers to put themselves in the shoes of the antagonist. To see the murders from the other side of the table, to try to make a motive that forces you to ask yourself, could that have been me? And I think that is it's kind of easy to take, or I don't know. If you look at a film like Godfather, what Mario Puzo did there with Michael Corleone is, of course, that you make him look like the good guy. In the first scenes, he's in his uniform, coming back from World War II, having fought the Nazis, fought for democracy and his country, and he's in there at the wedding with his girlfriend, and telling her the story about we gave him an offer he couldn't refuse, and then he assures her that that's them, that's not me, just to make sure that we know that he's the hero, he's our guy. And then slowly, gradually, he's turned into a villain. So at the end of the story, he's a mass murderer, and he even lies to his wife. So he's but when you ask people who leaves the cinema who is the protagonist of the story, well, it's Al Pacino, Michael Corleone. With that was because you were manipulated into rooting for him to begin with, and so you are willing to go with him anywhere. But it's more difficult to go the other way, to start with someone who is a villain, who's a killer. You have in Hollywood, you have the saying "save the cat," the expression that if you in the first scene makes a guy save a cat, then he's Michael Corleone. You will go with him anywhere. Well, the other problem is kill the cat. If you have him kill a cat in the first scene, how do you make him become the good guy? How can you make the audience sort of sympathize with this guy, or understand his motives? And that's a challenge that I find very inspiring, and that's what I'm trying to do with the villain in this book. That's what I've been trying to do with Truls Bunchen, as I mentioned. And it's I think the modern readers are also ready for that kind of challenges. It's as if I think the modern audience, not only for books, but for movies and TV series, we are probably consumed 10 times as many stories per year as our grandparents. So we have so much knowledge in storytelling. So the classic 3-act story of a movie, we are sort of getting a bit tired with that. And I think that is why the TV series, the cutting edge TV series, became so popular, because we were getting tired with the old take no chances Hollywood movies, where you, with a little experience, could tell exactly what was going to happen. So I think that now with, let's say, Breaking Bad, the writers are giving themselves and the audience the challenge: how can we sympathize with a guy who is selling drugs to our teenagers?
That's a question, and I want to get back to Hollywood because you've had some experience, some brushes with Hollywood. One really, really good, and one that raises questions. But I wanted to talk a little bit about Oslo, because Oslo is such a centerpiece for all of your books. But in this one, I felt like the plot really was analogous to maybe how you feel about the city, with the penultimate being the Munch Museum, which I looked up, by the way, and you're right, it's ugly as hell.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I mean, Oslo has become like a character in the series, and I didn't plan it that way. Actually, the first 2 novels, they took place outside Oslo, and it wasn't until the 3rd novel that Harry returned to Oslo, and it has to do with my relationship with Oslo. I moved away from Oslo when I was 8 years old, and I always longed back to Oslo. That was my city. So I had almost this, I had this romantic image of Oslo in my head, and I still have that. Although now I lived for Oslo most of my life, but then again, I think I like stories with a strong sense of place, time and place, and so it's not like I've been asking, how come you think that Oslo, this peaceful city, is a perfect backdrop for all these stories about murder, and I said no, Oslo is not a perfect backdrop. Oslo is a lousy backdrop for stories like that. But I happen to live there, so it's as simple as that. So I'm using Oslo 90%, the real Oslo, but 10% is the last 10% is like a twisted Gotham City version of Oslo.
I was just going to say, I have to ask: is the Jealousy Bar a real place?
It is now.
It really?
No, it was a bar that I invented for one of my stories. But when we released that novel, we actually opened a Jealousy Bar,
Really?
and it had that name for a short while.
Now Patrick's headed to Oslo.
Well,
Sorry?
yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, there are some great scenes in the book. It's set there, but there's a lot of music, associated with the Jealousy Bar, and I guess that kind of brings us to just to music. And this might be kind of a, I don't know, kind of a not a very well thought out question, but you're a musician, and how has music kind of informed your writing, and how has writing informed your music? Or is there a lot of synergy back and forth?
Well, I think listening to music has probably influenced me just as much as writing and performing music. I think that when you look at the writers who has influenced my generation of writers, Bob Dylan and Tom Waits, Neil Young, Bruce Springsteen will be among them. And I also think that, especially since I was the songwriter in my band, I think writing lyrics, trying to tell a story in 3 verses and a refrain, that's a great school for any novelist. because you have to writing lyrics like that, and our band we have like storytelling lyrics. You have to trust your readers. You have to trust their imagination and their intelligence, because you can only sort of give them directions and ideas, and so they have to paint the rest of the picture themselves. And I thought when starting to write novels that would be the opposite, that I had to fill all these pages with words and sort of spoon feed my readers, before I quickly realized that it doesn't work that way. It's exactly the same. You have to trust your yeah, I mean, any novel, it's written. I've only written 10%. My readers have to write 90% of the stories, I think.
There are a number of musicians that kind of musician writers. I think of Nick Cave comes to mind as a good example. He has that album called Murder Ballads, which seems like could be a nice fit with you as well.
Yeah, there seems to be a good deal of novelists who are musicians.
Yeah, more and more. Just getting briefly back to this kind of the serial killer, macabre aspect of this book. Thomas Harris, of course, looms large, in the serial killer world, with the Hannibal Lecter character and that whole template that he almost created. Was he influential to you at all in any way?
Hannibal Lecter.
Silence of the Lambs, Red
Silence of the
Dragon.
Lambs was a great movie. I can't. I think that when it comes to serial killers and psychopaths, I think that the American writer Jim Thompson was probably more influential for me.
Where's
I
Meg?
don't know if all of you heard about him or read him, but he was he would write that his contemporary would be Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett, but Jim Thompson was darker. He would write about these psychopaths in first person. You got to watch the world through the eyes of a psychopath 30 years before Bret Easton Ellis wrote American Psycho. And he was just so great. A friend of mine recommended him, and I remember picking up this paperback, and the title, I thought the title was so corny, The Killer Inside Me. And I read it, and it was just brilliant. It was called a Dime Store Dostoevsky, and I think that's quite accurate. He was like this guy trying to make a living from writing, so he was trying to write pulp fiction, crime fiction, but he was just too much of a genius to do just that.
Yeah, they feel like he's kind of working out his own personal demons on the page.
Yeah, and it was also interesting when you write his best novels, they are just fantastic. But when you read his worst novels, they are really so bad, and you can't believe, is this really the same guy? How can you lose it that way? But yeah, things went downhill.
Can you imagine walking into a drugstore and picking this Killer Inside Me off the rack? If you guys haven't read it, it's something. And coming home and saying, what the hell is this? I mean, you get into that first person perspective from this sheriff character, and all of a sudden you realize something ain't right with this guy.
Well, he says he has the illness inside him, right? And I think he calls it the sickness.
And it's claustrophobic, and oh man, it's something. We digress. Where shall we go next? We probably have. Should we open up the floor to questions, Barbara? Are we getting?
Let me ask about Hollywood and your experience there. The Headhunters, which I thought was a
great movie,
brilliant movie, and really, I mean, followed the book pretty carefully, and I wanted so much to like The Snowman because I love the book, and the actors seemed perfect for the part, the supporting characters, and and something happened.
Yeah, well, I think that movies are it's hard to predict. I mean, you can have everything can look perfect, and then it just doesn't work out. That is actually what happens to most movies, and it's just that most of those movies you never hear about. They just drown. But this had such a big push behind it, so it was very visible, the snowman. And it's I mean, I respect I totally respect the director, Thomas Alfredsson. He was very honest. He asked me, I want to do this my way. I don't want to follow the book. I want to tell my own story. And I said, yeah, you just go ahead. You're the storyteller. I've written a novel. The novel is there. I don't need to see the movie as a version of my novel. So just use it as hopefully useful, helpful input for your story. And the story didn't work. I think simple as that. And that's now 6 or 7 years ago, I think. And what is very interesting was that a couple of weeks ago, I read in an American newspaper they sent me, and they discussed what had happened to the snowman, because on Netflix, the streaming, the snowman had gone to #1 here in the United States, which was, and I have no idea why. And this article in the newspaper was also said that this movie was really not well received. Why is people, loving this movie? And I don't know. It's as a crime story, it doesn't really work. But maybe there's something in there that I haven't, seen.
Might we see some more adaptations? Is that something that anybody's exploring?
Right now, they are shooting, I think, in Greece, one of my short stories, The Jealousy Man, and not based on one of my novels. I wrote 2 episodes for a TV series, Canadian, Greece, Norwegian TV series about Leonard Cohen, So Long Marianne, that is being shot right now. Yeah, and there's always things in the pipeline. But normally there will be, if there's 20 movies in the pipeline, then maybe one of them will end up on the screen.
I also forgot, I neglected to mention the Oil, the movie that you helped adapt, or the Oil.
Yeah, the Occupied TV series. I really like that series. That turned out really well, I think.
It did.
Yeah.
There's a lot of dense characterization in it.
Yeah. I didn't write that. I had like the idea for it and, the basic story. But apart from that, I can't take any credit for that.
You mentioned a few minutes ago, that the movie version, it had on paper all the elements that it should have been good, Did anybody see that adaptation of James Lee Burke that was done by great French director Tavernier? Tommy Lee Jones as Robichaux, perfect casting
The Electric
choice.
Mist, right?
Yeah, and it had all these elements, and it sucked. It was so bad.
John Goodman.
I don't know. Maybe some of you disagree with that, but it seemed like it should have been really good. Anyway, an excellent adaptation of The Bard here. Can you talk a little bit about adapting Shakespeare?
Yeah, well, I was contacted by the publisher, and they were approaching different writers to write a novel based on one of Shakespeare's plays in connection with the 400-year anniversary for his death. And I normally don't do anything, based on other people's ideas. it just doesn't work for me. I need sort of the enthusiasm of coming up with the ideas, sort of the best part of writing, I think. But in this case, it was a bit different because when I was a kid, I saw Roman Polanski's movie Macbeth. I was, 11 or 12 at the time. I had tried reading Shakespeare. We don't have, Shakespeare in. We don't read Shakespeare in school in Norway. We read, Ibsen and our own playwriters. But I had tried to read Shakespeare in English, which was, of course, for me totally incomprehensible. But then I saw the movie. Macbeth, and I just loved that movie. And later on, I found a Norwegian translation of Macbeth, and I read it, and I just loved that story. So when they asked me, I said that okay, if I can have Macbeth, I'll do it. So this is sort of how should I put it? This is I set this story in the 70s. So this is. Shakespeare meets Michael Caine in Get Carter from Newcastle, filmed also in the early 70s.
That book, though, there's been a lot of adaptations of classic literature and trying to modernize them. What I was struck by in your version of Macbeth was how closely you hewed to the original story, and the characters all had their modern day counterparts, and you could really see it play out. And of course, it's an epic tragedy, which made you perfect for it.
Yeah, I thought I thought this guy William Shakespeare had written quite a good synopsis for my story.
And I had mentioned. I had mentioned early on I wanted to talk about the mechanics of deceit, because that's how I approach your books. I know that I'm going to be led in one direction, steered to another, and yet another, and then I'm going to fall through the trap into the pit, and then I'm not going to know where I am. So I want to kind of reverse engineer that. If you could talk a little bit about the process of coming up with that misdirection. I mean, you're a magician with it.
Well, thank you. But like I said, that I think that we are so well trained as consumers of stories. So it's in order to manipulate you, I have to sort of manipulate myself. I have I think that probably I have to imagine a reader who is slightly more intelligent than I am myself. So I have to really I have to sort of outsmart myself, if you see what I mean.
This book in particular, it's like, what was that old show? Will the real person? It's like, all right, will the real villain stand up? It's constantly going throughout the book.
Yeah, it's I know like I told you with the Ellen Yelton, the female character that I make you invest. I do use conventional twists, so that you will see them I will hold them up as conventional, so you will recognize the twist and say, okay, I've seen this twist before, we're going that way. So I will not necessarily, come up with new material, but just use. Yeah, well, I mean, that is manipulating the reader, is to use material that the reader will recognize, and where the thought will go, and then that's the wrong way. But then in the next turn, they will know that, okay, so he is leading me down this way, and I know, so that means that is not the right way. Well, this time maybe it is the right way. Maybe it is the simple solution, what is right in front of you.
Do you have to flowchart that?
No, to a certain extent I do. I mean, I do work on synopsises, and before I start writing chapter 1, I will have a synopsis of between 50 and 100 pages, maybe, where I put in the whole plot. The plot is there, and it turns on the twists. So I can, just concentrate on sort of the interior of the story and the characters.
Do you consider, it sounds like you really consider your books character driven as opposed to plot driven, that the plot is a way to get your characters.
Yeah, well, I think both. I think that I mean I love the story, and if I when you say character driven, it means that the events are, the twists and turns are driven by characters, and so in that respect, it's character driven. It's driven by the needs and the desires of the characters, but I'm not dwelling into the characters, and so at the end of the book, you have gotten to know a number of persons, but you haven't really got a story. So I'm writing a story without the main character having changed throughout the story isn't really a story. It's the story that, the classic crime plot. What is that about? Well, that is about chaos, and then order has to be restored. There's need to be, balance, harmony in society. It's that is the classic crime novel, and in a way the same goes for the character. There has to be chaos and then order, or maybe if you're not full harmony, then some kind of new insight that the main characters have gained that makes them, makes them go on in life and go into the sunset in some way.
This is probably a good pause to go to questions from the audience if you have any. I'm going to start with one of our online friends from Italy, Stefania. She tunes in regularly. Her question is, do you think a writer should follow a moral or ethical code when writing? And also, do you have a bit of Harry in you? I'm sure you've been
if you
both.
as a writer that you should follow a moral code. I don't think that it's. I do think that we all follow a moral code in whether we know it or not in our the way we live, the way we relate to people, and also the way we create art. I think that I might have claimed to be a nihilist, but it wouldn't be true. I do have a moral code. But it doesn't mean that I think that is the only way to do it, and it just I think all books are political in a way. The way you describe a city, it's bound to be political. It's in the editing. You are being political when you choose to highlight something and leave something out. And in being political, even subconsciously, you also follow a moral code, I think. How much is me is in Harry? 73% around, I'd say.
70 or 17?
73.
73.
Yeah.
Is the other 27 Oyston? Because I kind of...
Yeah. Oh, well, I think it's impossible to write about a character for that many years without using yourself in the character. It was never what I intended to do, but I think it's just you will have to share something with your protagonist, at least some basic values, political or moral values, sense of humor, maybe taste in popular culture.
Yeah, I can do it. Yeah, let's open it up to questions here.
Thank you very much for coming to our warmth. I may have a distorted perspective, but I see a number of writers who go on to more garish scenes, more American type, bloody scenes, multiple murderers, ghastly stuff. And I've seen that happen over time, and maybe it's a sign of our times. Then I look at your book, The Kingdom, which really didn't have that. And so I'm wondering, there seems, and I haven't read this new one, of course, but what do you think of that? I mean, on one side, it's almost, to me, some of the stuff is Hollywoodish in its dramatic ghoulishness. And then you have The Kingdom, which was a magnificent book, I thought, regarding the complexity. So I'm kind of confused about, is this just writing more books like Harry? Because it didn't start off that way. You see my question?
I think the level of violence or number of or the body counts in my books depends on the story, and The Kingdom is not that kind of story. I think that I've been criticized for being too violent in my books, and it is of course what you try to do as a storyteller is to convince the readers that they should care about whether this monster is being caught or not. So if you have to, or at least what I try to do is emotionally shock the readers into really being scared and really caring about this. And it could be that you that we maybe subconsciously or consciously use stronger and stronger means to get that reaction. Maybe you think you need that. And I don't know, maybe you don't. I ask myself, but it's also for me, it's in the genre of that story. I'm more influenced by the hard-boiled American detective novel of the 50s and 60s than by horror stories or violent stories from the last 20 years. So I'd claim that if you read The Killer Inside Me, it's just as violent as anything that I've read recently.
Thank you for being here. How did you come up with Harry? Did you dream him? Did you?
She asked, how did I come up with Harry? I had, when I was writing my first novel with Harry, which was the first attempt I made at writing a novel, I had promised a girl who worked at the publishing house. She had asked me to write something for them because she had read the lyrics of my band. So she figured I could write a novel. So I said that I'm going to Australia for 5 weeks. I'm going to write something there. And so on the plane, down to Sydney, I had some time, so I planned sort of a plot and the character Harry Hole. And I based him on the hard-boiled American detective, from fiction. I was probably most inspired by Frank Miller's graphic novels Sin City, where he sort of embraced the cliches of the hard-boiled American detective. And that was half the inspiration. The other inspiration was probably from, Scandinavian crime fiction. And it was, physically, I imagined Harry because his name was taken from Harry, was a soccer player in my hometown, was, the hero of the soccer team. And then Hole is, that's the name of, was the name of the local police officer in the village where my grandmother lived. So we would go there for summer holidays, and my grandmother, and I'd never seen this police officer, but my grandmother, she would always say that if you're not home and in bed by 8 o'clock, then Hole will come get you. So I always imagined that, you know, this tall, blonde, scary guy with steely blue eyes, and actually I was many years later, after I'd written more novels about Harry. I was in my grandmother's little town for an event, and then this old man in his 90s came up to me, and he was tall and he was blonde, and he had these really blue eyes, and he shook my hand with a bony hand, and he said, "Hello, I'm Hole." He said that. My only thought was, it's not 8 o'clock yet.
You were home.
You started the books with Harry, and you mentioned Australia, and I think your second one was Thailand. Did you envisioned Harry as sort of a, at least my question is, did you envision Harry as sort of a jet-setting detective where you were going to move him from place to place before you settled on, I'm going to bring him back to my country?
Oh yeah, no, it was, the first novel was simply because I was in Australia. For the second novel, I wasn't sure it was going to feature Harry. It was just, I was inspired by, I was a big fan of Ray Bradbury. And I just loved his, the science fiction writer, and I loved his Martian Chronicles. Just the idea of inventing a place that is, you know, mainly really strange place, but somewhat familiar at the same time, and that you can sort of just, you know, use your imagination to come up with this place. And you, so I went to Bangkok because that was sort of, for me and I suppose for my readers, Mars. You know, a place where nobody had been, so I could just, you know, make up my own rules for the place. So it wasn't until my third novel that I knew that I was coming back to Oslo, like you said. But so the short answer would be no, it wasn't about that.
Here's a question about the 73% of yourself that you mentioned. I hope it's not too indiscreet, but I'm wondering, Harry has quite a problem with alcohol and substance abuse, and I'm wondering how you access that.
Yeah. I didn't, I never had problem with alcohol myself, but I've been, and it's not like I've been any in my, you know, close family, but I've been in the music business for so many years, so I have been close to alcoholism. But then again, it was, I decided that okay, so he's going to be an alcoholic, and he's not going to be not you know, the cool hard drinking detective of Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett. This guy is going to be his Achilles heel. It's going to be his, you know, sickness. And I decided I'm not going to try to be clever and, you know, write, you know, about alcoholism in general. I'm going to focus on this character and his relationship to alcohol and how he deals with it. And there's, I think that alcoholism is as specific to individuals as any other thing, as their marriage or their way of working, or you know. So so that's how I did it. And but so it was interesting to me that I got so many reactions from people who had problems with alcohol themselves or were close to somebody who said that you must have, you know, some personal experience with this. And I do have some, but probably not more than most people.
I want to thank you all for your attention. It's hard to sit in those chairs for more than an hour, so we're going to wrap it up in a minute. But I have wanted to tell Joe something, excuse me, for a long time, but I have to ask him a question first. Was your first novel published in Norwegian and translated into English, or did you publish it in English?
No, it was published in. It wasn't until my third novel that had like a breakthrough in Norway. Then that was published into English, The Redbreast.
Right. Okay. So we have a history with Joe that he probably doesn't know that goes all the way back to that first book that was published in England. In English. And he went to England and he went to London and he signed a lot of copies of it. And we imported a couple of hundred copies because the word was that it was a sensational book and he was going to be a star. So we have actually been with you from your very first book in English.
That's good to know.
Yeah,
Thank
it was
you.
so exciting.
Yeah.
I can still remember all this electricity that comes along because booksellers love to find new voices and, new readers, new authors to introduce you readers to. And sometimes we have to go an extra mile and fly them over here from London in order to do that. But it was very exciting. So we've come to the point where I want to thank, first of all, let's thank Joe for coming tonight.
Thank you.
And then, Robert, there's a book there on the table. Amazingly, it's a serial killer novel set in Sweden. I thought it would be perfect to give away tonight. Very well reviewed. And to do that, Jacob, how many numbers do we have up there? Okay. I'm going to ask you to pick a number between 1 and 35, and we are going to give away, 19. I didn't
19.
even have to do that. Is number 19 here? You have to look in your book, and you actually have to be here in order to win it. No? All right. We're going to have to do another number.
21.
So close, right? I know. No 21 either? There's a whole middle group of people who didn't come.
Then it's 11.
This is going to be silly. So all those people bought books and decided to stay home in the heat. That's what happened here. All right, Robert, break the spell. You pick a number. Wait, we do have a 21? You found it. Okay, we'll give it to you. So what we'd like you to do is to fold up your chairs and lean them up against that wall. And then if you'll line up by number, skipping the gaps, and then Joe can sign your books. So thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.